Going on, guys? I'm Rennick from Air Guard Boys, and today I'm going to talk to you about the difference between active duty and Air National Guard. So I tend to get a lot of questions about what's the difference between active duty and Air National Guard. This is for the Air Force. A lot of this, though, does apply to pretty much the difference between active duty and any reserve component. There's a little bit of crossover there, but I'm going to dive a little bit more specifically into the Air Force side of it. So here we go. So when someone's thinking of coming into the military, one of their biggest questions is, hey, should I go active duty or should I go, reserve component, Air National Guard, Air Force Reserves? In order to understand the differences, you also got to understand what's the same. So when you're coming into the military, again, in this case, the Air Force, the big thing to remember is that all your training portion of being in the military is the same. That's probably the biggest commonality. There's no separate training for Air National Guard. There's no separate training for active duty. It's all the same thing. Basic military training is going to be at Lackland Air Force Base down in Texas. There's only one site where people train, and that's Lackland's in San Antonio. The other thing too to remember is that tech schools, so your technical or vocational school, it's all the same for the Air Force. So whether or not you enlist with active duty or you enlist with the Air National Guard, it's going to be the same training, the same school, same uniform, all that's the same. All the uniforms say Air Force. There's no difference in terms of how you enlisted. So that's one of the big things to remember is that there's not a separation in terms of training. Where things start to get different is the type of contract that you're signing. So when you sign an active duty contract, you're signing a typically 4-year contract, and from the time you start, you're full time, right? So you get one giant order that runs from this date to that date is 4 years, and you know that you're going to be full time. When you're signing a reserve or Air National Guard contract, you're actually signing a 6-year contract. Your training portion, you're going to be full time. So, however long that takes for you to do your basic military training, your technical school, and your on the job training, that portion you're full time. But when that's done, then you are part time. Then that's when you become that traditional, weekend warrior kind of thing that people use. You're coming in once a month, a couple weeks in the summer for your training, and that's what you're doing. So those are the biggest difference. It's that type of contract that you're signing. So the way I like to break this down when someone's trying to make that choice is I say, let's look at some of the pros and cons. Now, remember, when we're talking pros and cons, they can be different for different people, right? So what I'll put in a pro column might actually be a con for someone else, but we got to kind of break this down somehow, right? So to me, pro for active duty is for those people that want to know, hey, am I full time? That's pro. You know that from the time you start to the time you're done, you're working full time for that, 4 years or so. That could also be considered a con if you don't want that, but we'll get into that later. The other thing is that, one of the things that I kind of put in that con column is when you're active duty, and this is one of the biggest things that I say someone has to think about when they're going that route, is you really don't control a lot of your duty station. What I mean by duty station is where you're going to be located at. Now, people say various things. What I know for sure is the way it works is sometime near the end of your technical training, what happens is that there's you can give your top picks for military bases that you want to be. And, keep in mind, these are spread out all over, United States and various bases across the world. So if you are in Florida and you really want to stay in Florida, you can say, I want to go to, Eglin Air Force Base, or I want to go to any of the other bases down there. You can say, I want my top picks to be like one in California, one in, New Jersey, one in Florida, whatever it is. You may get that, but you may not. A lot of that, and how they judge that depends. It depends on what are the needs of the Air Force, what was your ranking in your class, what other people put down as their request. There's a number of different things. The point being is you don't really control where you're going to go. So that could mean that your top pick was use Florida as an example, but you end up in Minot, North Dakota, or you end up in Italy overseas, or you end up in South Korea, or you end up, somewhere on the West Coast. So you don't know. So to me, that's a con because that unknown is something that you should consider. I praise everybody that goes active duty. We absolutely need it. I praise everyone who goes reserves. In fact, anybody that's willing to serve, to me, go for it. Serve our country. It's a great thing to do. Just keep in mind, that's one of the things that you need to know when you're making that decision. When we get to the Air National Guard, Air Force Reserve side of the house, it kind of flips, right? So pro is that you know exactly where you're going to serve, right? If you join Air National Guard in New York, you know you're coming back to that base. One of the things that also is that you don't just know where you are, you're signing on to that base, right? So I'll give you an example. Vermont, small state. There's only one Air National Guard base or Air Force component in the entire state. So when you sign up there, you know that's where you're going to serve. So to me, that's a pro, is you have that control over kind of where you are. One of the cons is, and again, this is kind of that whole full-time, part-time thing. It's either good or bad for you, depending on what you want. So once you're done all your training, you're part-time, right? So that goes to me as an advantage if you're, trying to go to college, if you're trying to go to school, if you have a job, if you're, a police officer, firefighter, you're a nurse, whatever it is, and you like your job, well, then you just take this break, you do your training, boom, you're in the military, and then you're come back and you can go right back to work. And so work, school, whatever it is, that's how people in the reserve components, they balance that, is that they're only part-time once all their training is done. So to me, that's a big advantage for somebody who's thinking that, they want, to serve, but they kind of want to also keep their regular life. One of the other big differences is sort of how tuition assistance works. So when you're active duty, you get the GI Bill, right? Because you've done so much time, and when you're done, now you can pretty much fully benefit from that GI Bill and stuff like that. And that's going to help you be able to go to school down the road. But again, you can't do that while you're full time. You can't take advantage of that. There are some ways, because nothing is 100%. There's always, some people do it. They work full time, they go to school, fine, great. But on the whole, again, keep in mind, you're working full time. So if you want to stay up nights and do that, that's on you. Whereas with Air National Guard, and I'll use Air National Guard specifically versus reserves. That's another video that I'm going to do. With the Air National Guard, you have state tuition benefits that kick in most of the time the moment you've completed basic military training. And the one thing about them is they're usually tied to the state. So Connecticut will give you a certain amount of money to go to Connecticut, public and private schools. Vermont, same thing. They'll give you a certain amount of money to go to Vermont state and public schools. So those things kick in right after you're done basic training in most cases. So that's like a big pro, is that you can fully pay for school in most cases up to a bachelor's when you get into these reserve components. And these are just a hell of a benefit, So overall, kind of recapping, difference between active duty, Air National Guard, when you're considering joining is, 1, do you want to be full-time or part-time? 2, do you want to know where you're going to be versus can just kind of be anywhere? And then 3, again, how, tuition benefits, there's a big difference there. So I hope that helped. Thank you for tuning in today. Again, I'm Rennick from Air Guard Boys. I'm just here to, give my opinion, some honest, open information about people trying to join and answer some questions. If you like, click subscribe. I'll be slowly turning out more and more videos. This one's currently done from my house, so some of them will be coming from other workspaces and areas that we have. But, hey, like I said, I'm just out here to help people out. Appreciate you watching, and stay tuned for more.